August 1941, Quonset Point, Rhode Island. The American version looked bigger, stronger, and more modern. On paper, it looked like progress. In practice, it may have lost the one idea that made the original brilliant. The Quonset Hut became one of the most recognizable buildings of World War II. But its story begins with a quieter British structure built for a harsher problem: how to keep men alive when mud, cold, artillery, and shortage made ordinary shelter almost useless. April 1916, northern France. Major Peter Norman Nissen of the Royal Engineers was not trying to design a legend. He was trying to solve a battlefield emergency. Timber was scarce, tents failed in bad weather, permanent buildings took too long and used too many skilled men. Nissen's answer was brutally simple: bend corrugated iron into a curved shell, make the structure portable, and let ordinary soldiers assemble it fast with basic tools. That was the beauty of it. The hut was not elegant because it looked refined. It was elegant because almost nothing in it was wasted. Subscribe now if you want more wartime inventions whose hidden flaw or hidden genius changed far more than anyone expected. By 1916, testing was underway. The design could be packed onto standard transport, erected by a small team, and used for barracks, stores, offices, even field hospitals. During the First World War, at least 100,000 Nissen huts were produced. They spread across fronts and rear areas because they answered the real wartime question better than most buildings did. Not, is it comfortable, but can it get here, go up fast, and still stand? That was the principle at the heart of the design. And decades later, when the United States adapted it, that principle was exactly where the story became more complicated. The Americans did not ignore the Nissen Hut. They studied it, admired it, and then changed it. In 1941, the U.S. Navy needed an all-purpose prefabricated building that could be shipped anywhere and assembled without skilled labor. The first Quonset huts were developed at Quonset Point in Rhode Island, and production moved with remarkable speed. Official Navy history describes the wartime requirement clearly: lightweight, versatile, shippable, fast to erect. In that sense, the Americans were solving the same problem Nissen had solved a generation earlier, but they were solving it with a different industrial mindset. The Quonset Hut was based on the British design, but it was not a straight copy. It used an arched steel frame, corrugated metal skin, plywood ends, insulation, and a wood floor. It was roomier. It was often more comfortable. It could serve as barracks, clinics, offices, bakeries, workshops, and storage. More than 170,000 were manufactured during World War II. That number alone tells you why the Quonset Hut became an American icon of logistics. The United States did not merely borrow an idea, it industrialized it at scale, but scale can hide trade-offs. The Nissen Hut had been shaped by shortage. The Quonset Hut was shaped by American production capacity. One philosophy stripped the structure down to the minimum. The other accepted added materials in exchange for greater interior convenience. That sounds like a simple upgrade, until you ask the question the original design had answered so well. What happens when comfort, size, and refinement begin to interfere with pure field efficiency? That is where the open loop of this story really lives. The Quonset Hut was famous. The Nissen Hut may still have been smarter. The secret was not just steel, it was geometry. Nissen's original concept used the curve as a structural weapon. The form distributed stress efficiently, reduced weak vertical surfaces, simplified packing, and allowed rapid erection on difficult ground. It was designed for speed, portability, and economy under combat conditions. In the competitor script, that is the buried jewel, the claim that the American adaptation became bigger and heavier, but in doing so drifted away from the ruthless efficiency that made the British version so effective in the first place. That claim matters because wartime engineering is full of machines and buildings that became stronger on paper, while becoming less useful in the field. The Quonset Hut's wider, more finished layout made it more habitable. But habitability is not the same thing as elegance. The more you add, the more shipping space you consume. The more preparation a structure needs, the less universal it becomes. The more materials you demand, the more you depend on supply conditions staying favorable. A design born from desperation often survives precisely because it asks so little from the world around it. That does not mean the Quonset Hut failed. Far from it. American forces used it across the Pacific and beyond. It became part of the visual language of U.S. wartime expansion. It worked. It worked so well, in fact, that after the war it spread into civilian life as housing, workshops, schools, and commercial buildings. But popularity is not the same as perfection. The hidden payoff in this story is not that the Americans copied Britain badly. It is that they solved a slightly different problem, and in doing so, may have sacrificed the one quality that made the original nearly unbeatable under the worst conditions. Now, imagine one small change. What if the United States had adapted the Nissen Hut with less confidence and more restraint? Not a total redesign, not a different wartime doctrine, just a closer preservation of the original logic. Lighter, leaner, less improved, less comfortable, but more brutally efficient. In some theaters, especially where transport, mud, labor, and preparation time mattered more than interior comfort, that version might have been even more useful. It might have consumed fewer resources per unit. It might have gone up faster in marginal conditions. It might have stayed closer to the ugly genius of the first design. But that is only a controlled possibility, not a verdict, because the Americans were not fighting the First World War in 1916 conditions. They were building a global military machine in the 1940s, with different supply chains, different expectations, and different uses for semi-permanent structures. More comfort, more versatility, and more internal usability were not trivial advantages. They were part of American war-making itself. So, the better question is not whether the Quonset Hut should have remained a pure Nissen Hut. The better question is what was gained and what was quietly lost when a survival structure became an industrial product. That tension is the whole documentary in one line. In the end, the Quonset Hut became more famous. The Nissen Hut remained more original. And the difference between them says something larger about war. One design came out of immediate necessity in the mud of the First World War. The other came out of the manufacturing confidence of the United States in the Second. One was built to waste almost nothing. The other was built to do more things in more places for a vast military system. Both succeeded, but they succeeded according to different definitions of success. That is why this story is not really about who copied whom. It is about what happens when an invention crosses an ocean and enters a new culture of engineering. After 1945, both huts escaped the battlefield. Quonset huts became homes, shops, classrooms, and storage buildings across the United States and beyond. Nissen huts were repurposed in Britain and elsewhere for farms, garages, community halls, and post-war housing. Their afterlives were long because both designs had stumbled onto something durable: the power of prefabrication under pressure. Yet, history tends to remember the scaled version more than the first version. The louder empire usually wins the branding war, and that brings us back to the promise at the beginning. Did the American version lose the one principle that made Nissen's design a masterpiece? In the strictest sense, maybe not entirely. The Quonset Hut still preserved the central prefab logic of portability and rapid assembly, but it did move away from the original design's ruthless minimalism. It traded some of that purity for space, comfort, and industrial flexibility. So, the real answer is more interesting than a simple yes or no. America did not ruin the idea. America translated it, and like many translations, it made the original more famous while also proving how difficult it is to preserve the exact genius of a thing once you start improving it.